Hello, and welcome to Calming the Chaos with Tracy Cannella, licensed mental health counselor at Lokahi Counseling. This podcast provides tips, tools, and techniques to help people who are overwhelmed, stressed out, anxious, depressed, angry, or struggling with an addiction, eating disorder, or relationship problems. Through my personal stories, experiences, and training, my intention is to offer you new ways of coping with mental chaos and moving toward a calmer, more peaceful life. As you listen to this podcast, just know that although I am a licensed mental health counselor, this podcast is not a substitute for counseling or psychotherapy. And so if you're really struggling with something and you don't have a counselor, I strongly recommend that you find a licensed mental health counselor in your area to help you. You can do this by calling your local crisis line or by going to www.psychologytoday.com and doing a search for counselors in your area. That being said, now let the chaos begin. This episode of Calming the Chaos is called Captain Cranky-Pants, and we'll be talking about an emotion I didn't mention in my previous podcast about emotions. The emotion we'll be talking about today is cranky, and this is a relative of the anger family. In this episode, I'll describe to you what it feels like to be cranky, to feel out of sorts, not liking life, being snippy and snappy and snarky, and how this particular emotion can put you at risk for having more and more chaos in your life. We'll start by looking at how cranky can show up in your life. It can show up unexpectedly and make you more vulnerable to the major emotions as well as their related family members. Although crankiness can serve a purpose, remember, once you experience emotions, your chaos increases. And since the purpose of this podcast is to decrease the chaos you feel in your life, we want to decrease your general emotional crankiness. If you or someone you care about seems to be drifting into becoming Captain Cranky-Pants, this episode will help you recognize the signs and help you to use mindfulness to make a mental shift toward being less cranky and more willing to work with what is naturally presenting itself in your life. I'll tell you a story about a specific situation when I've experienced being Captain Cranky-Pants and what I did to handle being in that role. And as you're listening to the story, try thinking about what you would have done in the situation that I experienced. And at the end of the story, I'll point out the ways I believe I handled this situation effectively and ineffectively, and also what I learned from the experience. I will also give you some tips and tools that you can use in a similar situation of being Captain Cranky-Pants. What is cranky anyway? When I think of cranky, I think of old men and old women. Like when I was a little kid and I was playing a game and I went onto somebody's lawn and somebody, probably an older man or a woman, came out and shook their finger at me and said, "Get off my lawn. Stop having fun." They were cranky. Apparently, they just didn't want children being on their lawn. I also think of my cat, Oscar. He was a great cat. He lived for 20 years, and he was my guardian throughout that whole time. And yet, there were times where he would come at me, walking slowly, looking me straight in the eye, and he was cranky. He would go, "Ow. My Oscar looked like he was none too happy about what was going on. I think he wanted to be on my lap and he wasn't. Once he got on my lap, he was less cranky. Crankiness shows up unexpectedly, and so you need to be aware of that. And when you suddenly realize that you're not happy about what's going on, and you don't feel well in your physical body, like maybe you have a stomach ache or a painful body feeling, that's when crankiness can show up. It can also show up if a person or an entity appears and interferes with what you want to happen. Again, I think of the IRS. If I get a letter from the IRS, I instantly feel cranky. Crankiness makes sense, and why it does is because anger makes sense, and cranky is related to anger. What you want to have happen isn't happening, and what you don't want to happen is happening. So of course, when these things are present, you are cranky. And so right now, if you're feeling cranky, I would try and use the skill of validation. Validation of emotions is simply saying it makes sense that I feel cranky right now because something is getting in my way of feeling good about my life. I would like to tell you a story about how Captain Cranky-Pants has appeared in my life very recently. It started out as just a normal day. I felt a little bit more tired than usual. I had a bit of a headache and a backache and some low energy, but I started to go about my daily routines as I usually would. As I went through the routines, it seems that I wasn't able to perform my duties as well as I could have in the past. And then it seemed that my family members were upbeat. They were cheerful or happy, and I wasn't. So that made me more cranky. And then I felt like there were a lot more demands on my time and on my energy. People who emailed me, they wanted more information, and I just didn't seem to be able to handle it. My energy didn't match their energy. I felt like I was attending to their needs, but who was attending to my needs? And I didn't even know what was getting in the way of my goal. I just knew that my goal was to feel at peace, and I wasn't. And so things just kept getting in the way of me accomplishing my goal. My thoughts, feelings, and behaviors were all getting in the way. My thoughts. Everybody's demanding something of me. I've done everything I can, and yet nothing is getting accomplished. My feelings. Despair, sadness, anger. My behaviors. I roll my eyes. I purse my lips. I clench my fists. And some of the emails and phone calls I make are a little bit overly aggressive. Looking back, what I could have done differently in the situations I was faced with when I was Captain Cranky-Pants. 1. I could have kept a firm eye on my behaviors. I could have just listened and looked and watched and waited and just said, I will behave in a certain way. Even though I felt cranky, I could have told myself, Tracy, you can act differently. You don't need to act the way you are. 2, I could have gotten more sleep. If you get more rest, you're less vulnerable to negative emotions, including being Captain Cranky-Pants. If I would have practiced more self-care and identified any energy drains that I would have had and included more energy resources in my life, like the things I really wanted to do, and prevented the drains from draining my energy, I think I would have been in a better place. 3, I could have latched on to my family and my friends. I could have asked them for help. I could have asked them for their energy. I could have set an intention to be upbeat even when I wasn't upbeat. I could have acted opposite to my emotions and just done what I felt needed to be done in the moment, and not what my emotional self wanted, but what my logical self thought needed to be done. Number 4, I could have attended to my own needs. You can't expect everyone to attend to your needs. And so at some point in time, you just need to do it yourself. This is what I needed to do. I needed to identify my needs and attend to them. Number 5, I could have paced myself. I didn't have to answer all those emails right away. I didn't have to schedule things. I didn't have to do things. All that stuff can come in time. I could have paced myself. I could have done what needed to be done in the moment and saved the other stuff for later. The skill and tool I will give you today is from cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy. Here's how you deal with Captain Cranky-Pants. 1. You identify the emotion. That's not hard. The emotion is, I am cranky. Just identify that. Just be real with that and say, I'm cranky. Number 2, validate your emotion and say, it makes sense that I am cranky because I need more sleep. I am low energy. I have a headache. I am tired. Things are going on that are getting in the way of me accomplishing my goals. You can validate your emotions. Number 3, you can set an intention. What would I like to do instead of being Captain Cranky-Pants? Sometimes you can visualize yourself as something different than Captain Cranky-Pants. You can visualize yourself as being sort of a Zen master, somebody who's like Yoda, and just sitting on the top of the hill and saying, this is who I am. I am good. I am fine. That was the worst impression of Yoda ever. But that's the only one I have, so whatever. So, visualize yourself as being something other than cranky. It's so important for you to recognize crankiness. And when you do, just step back, validate your emotions, and use skills to visualize yourself doing something other than being cranky. While this may not give you a perfect life, it sure can improve the quality of the life that you're living. And if you want a peaceful life, you can recognize when emotions are happening, consider what to do instead, and visualize yourself doing something other than being Captain Cranky-Pants. Thank you for listening to Calming the Chaos. If the information in today's podcast was helpful, please consider subscribing and share it with your friends. You can find this podcast on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. On Apple Podcasts and on YouTube, you can subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, which would really be helpful to me because I value your support and your feedback. If you have any trouble finding the podcast, just go to my website at www.lokahicounseling.com. That is LOKAHICOUNSELING.com. And go to the podcast tab and click on the link to the podcast, Calming the Chaos. Also, on my website, there's a link to a CD I created called On This Day. This CD teaches you 9 processes you can use throughout the day to quiet your mind, and all of them are less than 10 minutes long. So check it out. Finally, you can visit my open Facebook group called Calming the Chaos for the latest updates on my podcast and for more resources and insights. I look forward to sharing my next podcast episode with you. In the meantime, take care.